The human ship simply guided them to the edge of human space and then returned to the darkness without a word. Send threats, the council ordered, their voices growing desperate. Tell them that their actions will have consequences. Tell them that the coalition will not forget this betrayal. The threats vanished into the same silence that had swallowed everything else. Vel I Prime fell. Keith escaped on one of the last refugee ships. He stood at the viewport and watched his world burn, watched the swarm consume cities that had stood for 10,000 years, watched everything he had ever known become ash and memory. Beside him, a young Valari child tugged at his sleeve. "Where are the humans?" she asked. "My teacher said the humans always come. She said they never leave anyone behind." Keithol did not know how to answer. He did not know how to explain that the humans had not left them behind, that the coalition had pushed them away, that the people they had counted on to save them had simply decided to stop saving them. That this was not betrayal. This was consequence. In the months that followed, Catharishan space and watched it fall apart. The Kvathi made a brave last stand at their home world. Without human shock troops to anchor their lines, their formation shattered like glass. The Thin calculated and planned and strategized. But their perfect mathematical models kept failing because they had always included one variable they had never bothered to measure. Human unpredictability. Human stubbornness, human refusal to accept that a battle was lost. Without that variable, the equations did not balance. Without humans, the coalition was just a collection of species that had forgotten how to fight. How to sacrifice. How to stand together when standing together was hard. The silence from human space continued. Kath found himself thinking about that silence more and more. It was not the silence of anger. Angry people shouted. Angry people threatened. Angry people demanded satisfaction. This was something else. This was the silence of someone who had simply stopped caring. Humans had spent 300 years as the coalition's shield. They had bled and died on 100 worlds, fighting battles that were not their own, protecting species who had looked down on them as primitive newcomers. They had done this because they believed in the coalition, because they believed they were part of family. And then, in one transmission, the coalition had told them the truth. They were not family. They were tools. They were weapons to be used and discarded when the cost became too high. Kath wondered what he would do if someone told him that. If someone he had trusted, someone he had fought for, someone he had watched his friends die for, looked him in the eye and told him he was expendable, he thought he might stop caring. 2 years after AIM, Cathro made a decision. He took a small shuttle, alone, unarmed, and flew toward human space. He did not know if they would destroy him. He did not know if they would imprison him. He did not know if they would even acknowledge his existence. But he had to try. He had to see for himself what had happened to the species that had once called the coalition home. He had to understand the silence. When he crossed the border, the automated warning sounded. Human space is closed. Turn back. He kept flying. A human ship appeared beside him within minutes. It did not fire. It did not threaten. It simply matched his course and flew alongside him like a silent escort. Keith transmitted a single message. My name is Ambassador Keith of the Valari. I come alone and unarmed. I come not to demand or threaten or negotiate. I come to listen. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then a human voice responded. Proceed to Earth, Ambassador. You will not be harmed. Cather let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. For the first time in 2 years, someone in human space had spoken to someone outside it. He did not know what he would find when he reached Earth. He did not know if humanity would help or refuse or simply send him away again. But at least the silence was broken. At least now there was hope. The stars burned with the light of dying ships. Admiral Helena Van stood on the bridge of the battleship, Defiance, and watched her fleet die. 32 human warships had entered the Aeon corridor 6 hours ago. Now only 23 remained, and that number dropped with every passing minute. The enemy filled the void like a living darkness. The Devourer swarm had no ships. In the traditional sense, they were organic masses of teeth and hunger. Creatures that traveled between stars and consumed everything in their path. Millions of them pressed against the human defensive line, crashing against energy shields and tearing it whole. Plates with claws that could cut through metal. Helena had fought the swarm before. Every human soldier had. For 300 years, humanity had served as the backbone of the Galactic Coalition's military forces. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the smartest, but they had something no other species possessed in such abundance that they did not run. The Valari were beautiful and ancient. Their ships moved like silver dancers through space. But when the battle turned against them, they fled to fight another day. The Thryn were calculating and cold. They weighed every loss against every gain, and they retreated when the mathematics told them to. The Kulvathi were fierce warriors, but even they knew when a battle was lost. Humans planted their boots and held the line. They had done so on a 100 worlds in 1,000 battles. They had bled for the coalition. Because they believed in it. Because they thought they were part of something greater than themselves. Helena was beginning to doubt that belief. Admiral, her communications officer, called out. His voice was tight with controlled fear. Message from Coalition High Command. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life. Ilana expected to see Admiral Keith of the Valari or perhaps Coordinator FR7. Instead, she saw a junior diplomatic assistant, a young Valari male who could not meet her eyes. Admiral Vance, he said, the Coalition Council has reviewed the tactical situation at Aram Corridor. Where are reinforcements? Halana demanded. We were promised a Valari Third Fleet, the Thryn Siege platforms. The Kovathi shock troops. Where are they? The young Valari swallowed hard. The Council has determined that resources would be better allocated to the secondary defense perimeter. Coalition forces are being repositioned to protect core worlds. Elena felt cold spread through her chest. Say that again. Human assets at Aram Quarter have been deemed expendable. The Valari's voice dropped to a whisper. Your sacrifice will be remembered, Admiral. The Coalition thanks you for your service. The transmission ended. Helena stood in silence. Around her, the bridge crew had stopped moving. They had heard everything. They understood what it meant. The Coalition had done the mathematics. Human ships against the swarm. Human lives against Fari lives. Thryn lives. Kulvathi lives. And they had decided that humans were worth less. That human blood was cheaper. That human families waiting back home mattered less than alien families. They had decided to let humanity die. Admiral. Her first officer, Commander James Chun, stepped closer. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Orders. Helena looked at the tactical display. The swarm continued to push against their lines. Without reinforcements, they would be overwhelmed within hours. She could order a retreat. She could save what remained of her fleet. She could run. Just as the Valarian Thrin had taught her that everyone eventually runs. But she was human, and humans did not run. All ships, she said. This is Admiral Vance. You have all heard the message. From Coalition Command. You know that help is not coming. You know what that means. She paused, feeling the weight of 300 years of loyalty pressing down on her shoulders. I am not going to order you to die for species who have abandoned us. Any ship that wishes to withdraw has my permission and my blessing. No one will think less of you. She waited. On the tactical display, she watched her fleet. Not a single ship moved. Very well, she said, and despite everything, she felt pride swell in her heart. All ships advance. If the Coalition wants us to be their shield, then let us show them what a human shield looks like. Let us show them what they are throwing away. The human fleet surged forward into the swarm. For 3 more hours, they fought. They fought with everything they had. Human ships rammed swarm creatures when their weapons ran dry. Human crews sealed breaches with their own bodies. Human captains triggered their reactors to overload rather than let their vessels be consumed. And slowly, impossibly, they began to push the swarm back. Helena watched in amazement as the tide of battle shifted. The swarm had expected easy prey. They had expected a species that would break and run like all the others. Instead, they found something that would not stop, would not yield, would not die quietly. When the battle finally ended, 17 human ships remained. The swarm had been broken. Their advance halted. Their forces scattered. The Aeon corridor was saved. Helena sat in her command chair and stared at the field of debris that had once been her fleet. 15 ships. Thousands of human lives. Families that would receive messages of condolence. Children who would grow up without parents. Parents who would bury their children. All because the Coalition had decided they were expendable. Commander Chun, she said quietly. Set course for human space. All ships, Admiral, our orders were to hold the corridor until our orders came from people who left us to die. Helena stood slowly. Her body act. Her heart act more. We held the core. We broke the swarm. And now we are going home. As the human fleet limped away from on, Helena made a decision. She would not seek revenge. She would not demand justice. She would simply tell humanity the truth about what had happened here. And she would let humanity decide what to do with that truth. Behind her, the On corridor stood open and safe. The Coalition core worlds were protected. Billions of alien lives had been saved by human sacrifice. None of them would ever know how close they had come to extinction. None of them would ever thank the humans who had died to save them. But that was about to change. Helena Vance was going home. And she was going to make sure that humanity never forgot what had happened at Aeon. Never forgot how their allies had betrayed them. Never forgot the price of loyalty to those who saw them as tools. To be used and discarded. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had shown humanity exactly how much they were valued. Now humanity would show them the same. The station was dying. Coalition Station had once been the heart of galactic civilization. A massive structure orbiting a golden star. It had housed the Great Council. Chambers where the fate of 100 species was decided. It had been home to millions of diplomats and traders and scholars who believed they were building something that would last forever. Now it drifted in darkness. Its power failing, its corridors cold, its population reduced to a few thousand survivors clinging to the last functioning sections. The swarm had not bothered to destroy it. They had simply moved past it, leaving it to rot while they consumed world after world. There was no need to waste energy on something so clearly finished. Inside the dying station, the last leaders of the coalition gathered. Cathal sat at the great table and looked at the beings around him. Coordinator Thrin 7, his mechanical body showing signs of damage that could not be repaired. General Breath of the Kovathi survivors, his warriors' pride broken by defeat after defeat. Representatives from a dozen other species. All of them bearing the marks of loss and desperation. They had once been the masters of the galaxy. Now they were refugees, survivors, beggars. Waiting for someone to save them. The mathematics are clear, Fran announced. His voice crackled with failing speakers. At current rates of swarm expansion, all coalition species will face extinction within 18 standard months. We do not have the military capacity to stop them. We do not have the resources to flee beyond their reach. We do not have the ability to survive on our own. Then we are dead. General Breath growled. We should have died fighting instead of running. Dying achieves nothing. Thrin 7 replied. We must find a solution. There is only one solution. A Valari counselor spoke, her voice hollow with exhaustion. The humans. The word hung in the recycled air. The humans. The species they had abandoned. The species they had betrayed. The species that had watched the galaxy burn for 3 years and done nothing. They will not help us. Breath said. We treated them as slaves and fools. We threw their lives away like garbage. Why would they help us now? Because they are human, the Valari counselor replied. They helped before. They always helped. Perhaps they can be convinced to help again. Kthro listened to the argument without speaking. He had returned from Earth months ago, carrying a message that no one wanted to hear. The humans were not angry. The humans were not seeking revenge. The humans simply did not care anymore. That truth was harder for the coalition to accept than any threat would have been. They knew how to respond to threats. They knew how to negotiate with enemies. They did not know how to deal with indifference. I will go, Keith said. Finally. Everyone turned to look at him. I have been to Earth, he continued. I have spoken with their leaders. They allowed me to stay among them for a time. They may listen to me again, and if they refuse, Thrin 7 asked, then we are no worse than before. But I will not go to demand or threaten or negotiate. He stood slowly. I will go to bear witness, to show them what their absence is wrought, and to tell them the only thing we have left to offer. What is that? The truth. Catholic around the table. The full truth of what we did and why. Not excuses. Not justifications, simply an admission of what happened and who was responsible. He paused. We earned this fate. I will tell them so. Perhaps honesty will succeed where diplomacy has failed. The journey to human space took 3 weeks. Cathal used the time to record messages, to gather evidence, to compile a complete record of the Coalition's crimes against humanity. Not just Athen, but centuries of smaller betrayals. Times when human lives had been sacrificed to protect alien interests. Times when human requests had been denied because humanity lacked political power. Times when the Coalition had taken everything humanity offered and given nothing in return. That it was a painful record to compile. It was painful because Cathal had been part of it. He had sat in council chambers where these decisions were made. He had nodded, along with arguments about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. He had never questioned the assumption that human lives were worth less than alien lives. He questioned it now. The human border loomed before him. The warning buoys spoke their eternal message. Human spaces closed. Turn back. Keel transmitted his identity and his request to pass. He waited in silence, remembering his first journey, wondering if they would be so merciful a second time. A human ship appeared. This one was different from before. Larger and more advanced. Its hull lines sharp and unfamiliar. 3 years of isolation had changed human technology in ways Cathal could not fully understand. Ambassador Cathal, a voice said. You return. I return, he acknowledged with a request to speak to your council once more. You may proceed to Earth. Admiral Vance will meet you. The journey through human space was even more striking than before. New stations hung in orbit around worlds that had been empty 3 years ago. Human colonies spread across systems that the Coalition had never bothered to explore. Everywhere Keith looked, he saw evidence of expansion and progress and hope. The humans had not spent 3 years mourning their betrayal. They had spent 3 years building a future without it. When he reached Earth, Vance was waiting for him as promised. She looked older, her hair now fully gray. But her eyes were still calm and steady. Ambassador, she said, I did not expect to see you again so soon. The situation has changed. Keithel replied, I would not have come if it had not. He told her everything. He showed her the records he had compiled. He explained the council's calculations, the political maneuvering, the cold equations that had valued human lives in credits and resources and strategic advantage. He hid nothing. He justified nothing. When he finished, Vance was silent for a long time. Why are you telling me this? She asked finally. You could have lied. You could have claimed ignorance. You could have said the right words to try to manipulate our sympathy. Because lies are what brought us here. Cather met her eyes. The Coalition lied to itself about what humanity meant to us. We told ourselves we were partners and allies while treating you as servants and shields. Those lies allowed us to commit atrocities without ever facing what we were doing. He bowed his head. I am done with lies. If humanity chooses to let us die, I want that choice to be made with full knowledge of what we did. You deserve that much. Vance studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Come with me, she said. The council will want to hear this. Keith followed her through the streets of Geneva. He walked past families and children and ordinary humans living ordinary lives. He thought about his own people scattered across the galaxy in refugee ships dying by the Thousands every day that he did not know if his honesty would make any difference. He did not know if anything could bridge the gap that the coalition had created with its cruelty and indifference. But he had to try. Not for the coalition, not for the governments that had made the decisions, not for the leaders who had sacrificed humanity without a second thought. For the children, for the innocents, for all. The beings who had never sat in a council chamber, never voted on which species should live or die, never understood the cost of the protection they had taken for granted. They deserved better than their leaders had given them. Perhaps Cather thought that was the only argument humanity might hear. Perhaps the only way to reach a species that had stopped caring about governments was to remind them that governments were not the same as people. Perhaps Earth was not what Keith expected. He had imagined a world preparing for war. Shipyards building fleets, weapons. Factories working day and night, training grounds filled with soldiers. Drilling for the great campaign of revenge. He had expected anger and hatred and the cold calculation of species planning to make their enemies pay. Instead, he found a world that peace. His shuttle descended through clear blue skies over a planet covered in green forests and sparkling oceans. Cities spread across the continents. But they were not military installations. They were homes. They were schools. They were parks where children played and markets where people laughed and worked and lived their lives. Humans were not preparing for war. Humans were simply living. The shuttle landed in a city called Geneva. Keith stepped out on the solid ground and breathed air that smelled of flowers and rain. Around him, humans walked past without staring. Some nodded politely. Others smiled and continued on their way. No one pointed weapons at him. No one shouted threats or accusations. It was as if he was just another visitor on just another day. A human woman approached him. She was older with gray hair and calm eyes, and she walked with the steady confidence of someone who had seen much and feared little. Keith recognized her from old intelligence files. Admiral Helena Vance, the hero of Aeon, the woman who has survived the coalition's betrayal. Ambassador Cat Howe, she said, "Welcome to Earth, Admiral Vance." He bowed in the Valari manner. "I am grateful you allowed me to come. You said you came to listen." Her voice was neutral, neither warm nor cold. That was more than anyone else from the coalition has offered in 3 years. She led him through the city. Everywhere he looked, Cather saw evidence of growth and progress. New buildings rising toward the sky. Children running through streets filled with art and music. Research facilities humming with activity. Spacecraft launching toward the stars, not for war, but for exploration and colonization. "You have expanded," he said quietly. "Yes." Vance nodded. "We have colonized 47 new systems since we closed our borders. We have developed new technologies, built new ships, created new industries. 3 years ago, we were a species that depended on the coalition for everything. Now, we depend on no one but ourselves." Cather felt something twist in his chest. "You could have done this before. You could have built your own empire. Why did you stay with the coalition for so long?" Vance stopped walking. She turned to face him, and for the first time Keith saw something behind her calm expression. Not anger, not hatred, something worse. Sadness. "Because we believed," she said simply, "we believed that the coalition was more than just an alliance of convenience. We believed that the species we fought bled beside, died beside were our friends, our family." She paused. "We We're wrong. She continued walking. Keith followed in silence. They reached a building at the center of the city. It was not large or impressive, just a simple structure of white stone surrounded by gardens. Inside, Keithol was brought before the Human Council, a gathering of representatives from all of humanity's worlds. He stood before them and felt the weight of their attention. These were not soldiers or politicians. They were teachers and scientists and artists and farmers. They were ordinary humans who had been chosen to speak for their species. They looked at him without hatred, but also without warmth. They looked at him the way one might look at a stranger on the street. Someone who simply did not matter. That indifference hurt more than anger would have. I have come to ask why. Keith said, the galaxy burns. Billions have died. More die every day. And you do nothing. A council member spoke. She was young with dark skin and bright eyes. We are doing nothing. That is exactly the point. I do not understand. Then let me explain. The young woman leaned forward. For 300 years, we were the coalition shield. We protected species who called us primitive. We died for governments who saw us as tools. We sacrificed our sons and daughters for people who would not sacrifice their own. She spread her hands. And what did we receive in return? We were left to die at Aeon. We were abandoned by those we had protected. We were shown exactly how much our lives were worth to the coalition. That was a mistake, Cathal said. A terrible mistake. Those responsible have been, it was not a mistake. Vance's voice cut through his words. It was a calculation. Your council looked at the numbers and decided that human lives were cheaper than alien lives. They decided that we were acceptable losses. She shook her head slowly. You cannot apologize for that. You cannot take it back. You can only learn from it. And what have you learned? That we will never again be acceptable losses. Vance met his eyes. We will never again bleed for those who see us as expendable. We will never again die for species who would not do the same for us. Keith felt desperation rising in his chest. The billions are dying. Children, innocents, people who had nothing to do with what happened at On. Do they not deserve help? The council was silent for a long moment. Then the young woman spoke again. They deserve help, she agreed. But not from us. Not anymore. Why not? Because we are not the galaxy's caretakers. We are not the galaxy's soldiers. We are not the galaxy's sacrifice. She stood slowly. We are humans. We are a species with our own hopes and dreams and futures. And we have decided to pursue those futures instead of dying for yours. Cather looked around the room. He saw no cruelty in their faces. No enjoyment of his suffering or the suffering of the galaxy. He saw only people who had been hurt too deeply to care anymore. People who had given everything and received nothing in return. People who had finally learned that their lives mattered. He understood then that humanity was not seeking revenge. Revenge required emotion. Revenge required caring about those you sought to hurt. Humanity simply did not care anymore. And that was terrifying. Is there nothing I can say? He asked quietly. Nothing I can offer. Nothing that would bring you back. Vance considered his question for a long time. You asked to listen, she finally said. So I will tell you something, and I want you to truly hear it. The Coalition broke something when they abandoned us. At Atheron. They broke our trust, our faith, our belief that we were part of something greater than ourselves. She paused. That cannot be fixed with words. Or treaties or promises. It can only be fixed with time and actions. Years of actions, decades of actions, proof, not promises, that things have changed. And until then, we will continue to build our own future. We will continue to grow and explore and create. We will continue to live our lives without waiting to be sacrificed for someone else's benefit. Vance smiled. Slightly, but there is no joy in it. That is not cruelty, Ambassador. That is simply self-respect. Keith nodded slowly. He had come seeking hope. He had found honesty instead. Perhaps that was worth something. May I stay? He asked. May I learn? May I begin to show you through my own small actions that not everyone in the galaxy sees you as tools to be used? The council exchanged glances. Something passed between them. A silent communication that Keith could not read. Finally, Van spoke. You may stay, Ambassador, for now, but understand this. We are not waiting to be convinced. We are not hoping to be saved. We have already saved ourselves. She gestured toward the window, toward the thriving city beyond. What you see out there is what humanity looks like when we stop carrying the galaxy on our shoulders. When we stop bleeding for everyone else's sake. She met his eyes. This is who we are when we choose ourselves. Remember that. The human fleet emerged from fold space. Like a sunrise breaking over a dying world. Keith watched from the bridge of a refuge transport, his heart frozen in his chest. He had dreamed of this moment. For 3 years. He had prayed for it. He had begged for it. And now that it was happening, he did not know whether to weep with joy or tremble with fear. The ships were nothing like the vessels humanity had flown at Atheron. Those had been Coalition designs built to Coalition standards limited by Coalition technology. These new ships were something else entirely. They moved through space with a grace and power that made everything around them look primitive. Their hulls gleamed with materials that Keith could not identify. Their weapons hummed with energies that no Coalition scientist had ever imagined. 3 years of isolation. 3 years of building. 3 years of becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity had returned. And they were terrifying. Admiral Vance's voice echoed across every frequency in Coalition space. Every surviving ship, every desperate refugee, every cowering world heard her words. This is Admiral Helena Vance of the Human Combined Fleet. We are not here to save your governments. We are not here to restore your councils. We are not here to rebuild the Coalition that betrayed us. She paused. We are here for the people, the civilians. The children, the ones who never voted for our abandonment. The ones who never sat in council chambers deciding which species should live and which should die. Across the galaxy, beings who had lost hope began to hope again. Refugees will be evacuated to safe zones under human protection. Medical ships will treat the wounded and the sick. Supply vessels will provide food and shelter to those in need. This is not negotiable. This is not conditional. This is simply what we have chosen to do. The swarm sensed the change in the battlefield. Millions of the creatures turned toward the human fleet. Their endless hunger, driving them to attack this new threat. They had faced humans before at Aeon. They had pushed through human lines before. They could do it again. They were wrong. Human weapons sang across the void. Beams of light that cut through swarm creatures like knives through paper. Missiles that detonated in cascades of fire, incinerating thousands of enemies with each explosion. Ships that moved so fast and struck so hard that the swarm could not adapt. Cathal watched the creatures die. By the millions. He watched the tide of battle shift in minutes rather than hours. He watched 3 years of swarm conquest undone by a fleet that should not have existed. But it was not the destruction that amazed him most. It was what happened between the Vesti and the amazed him most. It was what happened between the battles. Human transport ships dove into war zones, ignoring the fighting around them, landing on burning worlds to evacuate survivors. Human marine storm. Swarm-infested stations, not to plant flags or claim territory, but to pull terrified civilians out of hiding places and carry them to safety. Human medics treated wounds without asking species or political affiliation. Human hands lifted children from the rubble and promised them that everything would be okay, that they were saving everyone. Everyone who needed saving. Regardless of which species had sat on the Coalition Council, regardless of which government had voted to abandon humanity at On, they were not seeking revenge. They were not settling scores. They were simply doing what needed to be done. And they were ignoring the Coalition leadership entirely. General Breath's transmission came through on military frequencies. Human fleet. This is General Breath of the Korvathi Remnant. We request immediate extraction for Coalition Military Command. We have strategic intelligence that must be preserved. The human response was brief. Military command extraction is not a priority. Civilian evacuation continues. Military personnel may proceed to civilian extraction points like everyone else. Breath's voice rose in outrage. We are the coalition government. We are the leaders of your former allies. You cannot simply abandon us. A different human voice responded. It was calm and cold and utterly indifferent. We are not abandoning you, General. We are simply not prioritizing you as you did not prioritize us. Proceed to civilian extraction points or remain where you are. The choice is yours. The transmission ended. Cathal found himself laughing. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound of someone watching justice unfold and recognizing that it was exactly what they had earned. The humans were not monsters. They were not leaving coalition leaders to die. They were simply treating them like everyone else, like ordinary beings who would have to wait their turn. Like people whose titles and positions meant nothing in the face of crisis. It was the most devastating revenge imaginable. And it was not revenge at all. It was equality. The war lasted 3 weeks. When it ended, the swarm was broken beyond recovery. Their central intelligence, the great hive mind that coordinated their expansion, had been destroyed by human ships that penetrated deep into swarm territory and struck at the heart of the enemy. Without coordination, the swarm creatures became simple animals. Dangerous but manageable. The galaxy was saved, but the coalition was gone. Its council chambers remained empty. Its governments had collapsed or been abandoned. Its power structures, the hierarchies and systems that had ruled for millennia had crumbled to dust. In their place, humanity offered something different. We will not rule you, Vance announced in her final transmission. We will not protect you without your consent. We will not become the shield we once were, used and discarded when convenient. She looked into the cameras and across the galaxy. Billions of beings met her eyes. You must build something new, something better, something that does not treat any species as expendable. We will trade with you. We will work with you. We may even fight beside you if the cause is just and the alliance is real. But we will never again be your servants. She paused. The choice is yours. Build something worthy of partnership and you may have partners. Build something that treats lives as acceptable losses and you will face the consequences of that choice alone. The transmission ended in the months that followed. New governments rose from the ashes of the coalition. Some were better than what had come before. Some were worse. Humanity engaged with them all. Carefully, cautiously, always watching for the signs of the old thinking. Always ready to withdraw again if betrayal seemed likely. And always, the lesson of Athon hung over every negotiation. The memory of what happened when humanity was taken for granted. 1 year after the war's end, Keithall stood beside Vance on a restored world. Around them, children played in streets that had been rubble a few months before. Valari and Kvathi and a dozen other species worked together to rebuild what had been lost. Will you ever trust us again? Keith asked. Vance did not answer immediately. She watched the children playing, her expression unreadable. Trust is earned, she said. Finally. Your people have a chance to earn it. That is more than you gave us. Is there anything I can do to help? Anything at all? Vance turned to look at him. For the first time, there was warmth in her eyes. Not friendship, not yet, but something that might grow into it with time. Keep being honest, she said. Keep admitting the truth of what happened and why. Keep reminding your people that what they built before was not worth preserving. She paused. And keep treating humans like partners. Not tools. That would be a good start. Keith nodded slowly. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was simply an opportunity. A door left open for those willing to walk through it. He would take it. As they watched the sunset together, Cathal thought about the silence that had lasted for 3 years. The terrible, terrifying silence of a species that had simply stopped caring about those who had betrayed them. That silence had been humanity's greatest weapon. Not their ships or their technology or their willingness to fight. Simply their ability to say no and mean it. Their ability to walk away from a galaxy that did not deserve them and build something better on their own. The coalition had learned a lesson that would echo through history. Forever. Humans would die for those they loved. They would sacrifice everything for those who stood beside them. They would fight to the last breath for those who treated them as equals, but betray them. And they would give you something worse than revenge. They would give you exactly what you gave them. Nothing at all. And then when they chose to return, they would return as equals. Not as servants or shields or acceptable losses, just as equals. The galaxy would have to learn to live with that.